Really, R2, I can't believe you pushed the red button. What did you think was going to happen, you silly robot? The Jedi will have absolutely no clue as to our whereabouts thanks to you. Yes, you're right, I suppose. Whilst we await rescue, we shall just have to listen to the slick podcast, keeping it real and... Yes, that's right, R2. Keeping it groovy.
You have tuned in for a slick podcast. I'm here to seek the truth. Live from Scotland around the UK. The one and only slick podcast. Enjoy the show. Can I ask important questions? No matter how bizarre the truth might be. Tune in for Slick Podcast, keeping it real, keeping it groovy.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, or a very good day to you when and wherever you're listening from. And a very warm welcome to the show. I'm your host, Simon Laurie King. Coming up on today's show, my guest is the Reverend Dr. Jason Bray, Anglican priest and currently the Vicar of St. Giles Parish Church in Wrexham's busy city centre. Jason has the day-to-day running of a busy parish with all that you would expect a vicar to be doing: christenings, marriages, funerals, supporting and implementing the charitable works of the church, heading up committees, and the list goes on and on. But here's the thing, Jason is amongst a select few men and women that work as a deliverance minister, and it is this we will be talking about today. After having read Jason's book, Deliverance, a book I thoroughly recommend, by the way, I really wanted to invite the good father onto the show and have the conversation about his work with the paranormal happenings, which range from poltergeists to ghostly goings-on. Is Jason an exorcist? Well, the answer is yes. If needed, he can be. His book Deliverance is extremely interesting and thought-provoking. Jason, through his deliverance work, has encountered that which most would scare people silly, including me. But armed with his holy water, crucifix, Bible and faith, he steps forward to meet and banish that which is not of this world. But as you will find out, not all is as it first seems. I'm really looking forward to our conversation here today, so without further delay, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome the Reverend Dr. Jason Bray to the show.
Thank you, Simon. Really good to be with you.
Let's get the ball rolling on this one. After reading your book, Deliverance, I felt I just had to have a conversation with you about your experience as a deliverance minister. I want to say exorcist, but that is a term used for a very rare part of your role, if and when needed. First of all, Jason, tell us about the day job. What drew you to this calling of service to the people through the church? How long it took you to train as a priest initially, and your role in the community?
Okay, well, the day job, I'm a bog standard vicar, really. I run quite a big church, so it's I'm in Wrexham city centre, St. Giles, sort of church where we get lots of things going on. So we have quite a few visitors, quite a few tourists. Wrexham, of course, is lots of people are interested in coming because of the football at the moment. So Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney taking over the local football team. Quite a lot of interest there, quite a lot of media teams around because of what's going on at the other end of town. And, we benefit from that here. So that's part of my day job, dealing with that sort of media inquiry. And we also do, the sort of standard things you'd expect churches to do. So we're just about to head into the wedding season. So we've got a load of weddings coming up in the next couple of months. We also do funerals as well, of course, and because we're a big church in the city centre, we tend to get a lot of actually quite sad and sort of difficult funerals here. So that's a challenging aspect of my job as well. We do christenings, and we also do the sort of normal services that you expect a big church to do here. Lots of family work and lots of work with older people as well. So it's quite a varied thing. In the community, I'm sort of involved in the sort of tourist aspect of things. I'm also the mayor's chaplain for the city of Wrexham, so that's been quite involved over last year. So things to do with the Platinum Jubilee, and then the death and the the sort of things around the Queen's funeral last year. Wrexham became a city last year as well, so we were able to welcome the Queen Consort. Actually, there was the Queen to the church, and that was a really exciting thing to do as well. And in amongst all this, I also do the Deliverance stuff. But you're asking about training. I've been doing this for about 25 years now. I've always been drawn to be a priest. I suppose I was brought up singing in the church choir and felt that it was something that I needed to explore, and that my life wouldn't be complete if I hadn't done it. So for me, being ordained, being a priest, is like the sort of final bit of the jigsaw that meant that the pattern of my life was sort of, complete at that point. And, other pieces have been added as well. And one of those pieces is the Deliverance piece too. But most people train for 2 or 3 years. And so I trained for 2 years, and I got a degree in theology, and I've got a PhD in theology as well before I did that. So strong academic background. That's where I thought I'd end up. And actually, I'm sort of just a normal vicar running a sort of slightly bigger than average church, but it's a normal church in many respects. And I'm really happy doing this now. It's great.
As a priest, that's really not a job; it's a vocation, a calling in every way. But in the early days, as a young husband and father, and not yet fully fledged member of the clergy, even though your calling was sure, you and your wife and infant son moved into a house provided by the church. An exciting time of new opportunity, no doubt. But it was also an unexpected introduction into the paranormal for you also. Tell me about that house and the experience therein. Right,
okay. So wasn't something I was prepared for at all. As I said, I trained for 2 years in theological college, and we were supposed to have a session on the ministry of deliverance, but we were told, actually, there's no particular need for it. There's not very much call for it these days. And you think, well, okay, fair enough. So moved into the house, and we'd seen the house before we moved in. It was cold, it was dark, but it was January. Everywhere was cold and dark in January, and the house had been empty for, probably about a year at that stage, if not longer. So we thought, cold, dark house, it's been empty for a while. That's roughly what you expect. It'll be moved in the summer. And when we moved in the summer, it wasn't really fine. It was still sort of cold and dark, and we thought, well, actually, it's because it's very solidly built house, built out of sort of very solid brick with lots of iron slag, sort of there was local brick that they sort of built out of brick, just an iron slag, and that was that made it very solid, and the bricks were sort of when you touched them, you could feel that they were cold under there. So you thought, we'll just take a while to warm up, and so we thought it was something about the sort of way the house was orientated. So it wasn't south facing, it was sort of east west, and maybe it was about that. And you think about all these things. We bled the radiators, and there was a radiator that was sort of in need of bleeding, and okay, fine. So tried to get this house warm. While we were there, not long afterwards in September, so we moved in at the end of June, September, my son was born, Thomas. And so we installed him in the room we decorated for him, the nursery, 3-bedroom semi. So he was in the corner room, so 2 external walls, and we thought, actually, we noticed that the room was colder than any of the others. We thought, it's above the front door, it's got 2 external walls, but actually it's not too, it's not too bad. It'll get warm like the rest of the house. Sort of when we've got the heating on constantly during the winter. But it didn't. His room was always sort of slightly colder than the others, and the house was always sort of cold and dark, even through that sort of long summer. And then after he was born, and autumn heading into the winter, and we just sort of lived with it. So these were in the days when your phone socket was, your phone had to be plugged into the bottom of the stairs. So 25 years ago, before roving and then mobile phones, of course. And so you'd have to sit at the bottom of the stairs to talk to friends and family, and there was always a whopping great draft coming down the stairs. But we thought, that's just the way it is. But we tried to find the draft, and the house was sort of hermetically sealed. There were sort of PVC windows, sort of double glazed. Whatever, you just live with it. My mother made some spectacular chenille curtains, sort of floor-length curtains that she hung in front of the doors for us, and that didn't seem to make very much difference either. And the house was just cold and dark, and it stayed cold and dark. It never really warmed up properly. And so the following year, we moved in at the end of June in one year. The following year, I was then ordained priest. And I went away for a couple of days on a course to learn, sort of what being a priest actually means. And when I came back, my wife, who's very level-headed, said, there's something really badly wrong with this house. I said, well, what is it? She said, well, while you were away, Thomas's room was really like walking into an icebox. She said there was one night that it was so cold, it was right next to his cot. It was so cold, it was like sort of, it was like walking into sort of a freezer. I had to have him in bed with me because I was afraid that, he'd be, he'd just sort of, something untoward would happen. Not exactly freeze to death, but he'd get sort of hypothermia. It was so cold in there, it was unbelievable. And at around the same sort of weird experience as well. So reading in bed, and sort of got up and just before settling down, went to the bathroom, with the toilet, and came out to the bathroom, put my hand on the doorknob, and there, on the other side of the door, there was a figure, probably about my height, and glaring at me. And he was wearing, quite clearly, he was wearing a sort of weird sunburst mask, and sort of wooden mask with sort of holes cut for the eyes. And I could see these eyes staring straight at me, with sort of unbridled hostility. And I sort of stood there and I thought, actually, this guy, whoever he is standing in my house on the other side of the bathroom door. And so plucked up all my courage and sort of opened the door, and there was nobody there. So I sort of dived into our bedroom and sort of under the duvet. And I said, "Are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I said, "Well, I haven't seen anything." And then we had this sort of conversation. Okay, you need to do something about this. So I spoke to my boss. I was the curate, and curate's like an apprentice. So there's somebody who sort of looks after you. In this case, he was the vicar, and the vicar came round. He said, "Yeah, not a problem at all." Took me very seriously, and he said, "Yeah, I'll bless the house for you, and we'll say some prayers, and we'll take it from there." And that's what happened. So he wouldn't let me see what he was using. I think some of the prayers were in Latin. I was trying to look over his shoulder, but he really wouldn't let me see. We walked round. He splashed some holy water at the walls. He spent quite a lot of time in Tom's bedroom. Then we all went back to the main room of the house, and we said the Lord's Prayer and a couple of final prayers at that point. And I'm not saying it was instant, but the house was basically okay after that. It was, this was July, and suddenly it felt like July. It was sort of warm and light, and the heating that we'd had on pretty much constantly, we were turning it down, and then when the came around, we then turned the thermostat down because the house was too warm. Tom's room was, was fine. It was light. It was airy. It was warm, and the draft on the stairs. Well, there wasn't any draft on the stairs anymore. And what a good friend of ours said to us was that actually, I hated coming to your house before. I just didn't like being there. Didn't like going to the bathroom. He said, the only toilet was in the bathroom upstairs. So he said, I just hated going to the bathroom in your house because it was so awful. He said, it's lovely now. And my niece, when when the book was published, and I tell the story in the book, my niece said, yeah, that makes sense. She said, I can remember coming around to your house and being told that, to wear an extra coat because Jay's house, they call me Jay, Jay's house is always, is always absolutely freezing. So you just need to sort of wrap up warm when you go there. And of course, we got the heating on full and the third. So that was my first experience.
So that sounds like whatever it was projecting into your mind, because it's on the other side of the door. What was the history of the ground the house was built on? And is it something that was interacting with you because it wasn't happy that a holy man such as yourself, let's say, what happened to be living in the house? Or was it and I know we'll go into this later, but a recording that you happened to pick up on?
I've got no idea, really. The house, talking to one of the church wardens afterwards, and he would know, because the vicar would never have told him that he, about anything that had happened in the house. He just didn't know. But he said, do you like living in the house? I said, yeah, it's good. And it was then. But I didn't elaborate at all. I just said, yeah, it's fine. It's a nice house. He said, because when they were building the house, they disturbed a Roman graveyard because it was on the edge of the town, and that's roughly where people were. They were, the Roman times and the road heading out. And he said, yeah, the main road was roughly where that house was, and so they disturbed a Roman graveyard. He just sort of shrugged slightly and left it at that. So. One of the difficulties is that I don't know whether my experience was a figment of my imagination, which is possible, although it was so vivid that that sort of thing doesn't normally happen to me. And it did feel that there was somebody standing the other side of the door. The temperature thing and what was going on, the rest of the house really was noticeable and noticed by other people as well as ourselves. What it was, I don't know. So one of the things that we try to do when we're going to see people who are experiencing similar things, and I've had people describe situations that are remarkably similar to the one that we had, is trying to work out what it is that's happening. Because that would, what's happening would depend on what you would do, depends on what's happening in the house. But, to some extent, actually, a lot of the time you do something and you say prayers. Basically, what we're doing is we're inviting God to deal with this situation in that way. And in a sense, if it works, it works. And most of the time, it does actually work if it's that sort of thing. So it could be, we talk about place memories, which is sort of almost like something that's recorded by the house, like you said, or occasionally there will be an attempt to communicate with somebody, but very often that's somebody that that knows the person. In this instance, maybe it was an attempt to communicate. I don't know. But whatever it was, it went.
You mentioned that it could have been your imagination, but because of the sunburst mask and what you've told me, and also that obviously I've read about the possible Roman burial ground, it seems that influence in your mind was very Roman or paganist image.
So it was quite clearly a pagan priest, but I didn't know anything at that point about any Roman stuff that was going on at all. I know that there was, but a lot of places sort of Roman settlements of some description. So that wasn't swishing around in my subconscious really. It was just felt like a really vivid experience of a real person. And, if I'd opened the door and saw him, I wouldn't have been surprised, but I didn't, fortunately.
So let's talk about the preparation, because being a deliverance minister, obviously, first and foremost, you must be ordained as a priest, and you've obviously got enough to do as it. And I refer to it as a sideline. It really does undermine that. But could you briefly outline what it would be to become a deliverance minister? Because I'm guessing it's more than here's a book of instructions and in the name of God, just cast everything out. Would you mind just explaining what that course of events, how you were trained and what it takes? Because I'm guessing that you could actually fail that test and you could be told by your boss, this isn't for you.
Right. Okay. So what happened was that I had a couple of sort of call outs in a sense, and because occasionally parishioners might sort of say that there's something weird going on in my flat. Can you come and bless it for us? And that was very much part of what was done at the time. There's in a sense we've sort of clamped down on that sort of thing, but it was what a lot of parish priests would actually do. But we weren't specialists, we just sort of go around and do this. But I was talking to my bishop. Bishop's a guy who's in charge of the diocese, and he was Bishop Dominic Walker, who was actually quite famous as a deliverance minister himself. So he'd written a book called The Ministry of Deliverance, which is, sort of still, it's a really short book, but it's, in a sense, it's a classic of its time. And it basically tells you, if you've got this phenomenon, this is what you need to do. And so Bishop Dominic, gave a talk to the clergy about it, and I sort of went to him afterwards, and I said, well, actually, I've had these experiences. I described some of my experiences, and he said, yeah, actually, I can send you off on the training, and because I'm looking for somebody to appoint as the deliverance minister for the diocese. So that's what happened. The training, basically, it's a sort of week's residential course. And it tends to work on the principle that you will have had some sort of experience of this sort of thing before. So you're sponsored by your diocese. So the choosing stuff actually happens at diocesan level, by the basically bishop, because our ministry is licensed and insured actually by the bishop. So we have we're covered by the bishop's insurance when we go out and do these jobs. So basically the training was quite intense, weeks training, residential course, and nearly all of it was about psychology and psychiatry. So it basically worked on the principle that anybody can go out splashing holy water around the place, but working out what is going on is a much more subtle sort of thing. And when the really difficult thing that we get is that people, and you mentioned exorcisms, so people will get in touch with us and say, I've got a demon, I want to be exorcised, and trying to work out what's going on there, in terms of sort of spiritual stuff, but also in terms of psychiatry and psychology, that's where it comes to shove. So that's where the course actually focused. So it really was a sort of introduction to psychiatry in sort of 4 days, and an extra day sort of, well, actually, if you get this phenomenon, you splash holy water at it. If you got this one, you say a requiem mass. So it was like that, yeah.
So you have to take into account the faculties of somebody that could be quite in a delicate place, being a deliverance minister or not, you have to take into account where people are at in their mental state. If they're saying that they're possessed or they have activity in their home, you're going to be assessing their mental state, and also if it's safe for you, because I understand that you go in, or you tend to go in pairs to these places. If it's safe for both of you to attend this.
Yeah, and in a sense, because there is a risk going to see somebody at home who is reporting, sort of all sorts of stuff going on, and sort of obviously, it's more risky than going to see somebody on any other occasion. We do tend to go in pairs, and actually that's useful on all sorts of levels, because what usually happens is that one of us leads and the other one listens. and the one who's listening will often pick up other stuff. So if you've got two trained deliverance ministers, they said, did you notice? Oh, actually, no, I didn't notice, because I was sort of, sort of concentrating on this aspect of what was going on. And, that becomes part of the experience of sort of what we do. And then we work out what we're going to do from what we've heard. But yeah, it can be, it can be quite risky. During the lockdown, there were a couple of occasions when I was basically on my own with people, and sort of early on in my ministry, I was sometimes on my own with people, and would sort of think, oh, actually, this is a bit of a risk, because nobody really knows where I am or what I'm doing. So that's
of course, you don't know really what you're getting into. I know my listeners are probably thinking, come on, get into the paranormal part of this, but we're just going to have to set the ground first of all. But before we do get into your work in the field of the paranormal, or at least what would outwardly be reported to you as initially, I find it encouraging that, having read your book myself, and you're not glamorizing the paranormal, such as the television shows tend to these days. Fun fact, I haven't got a television. I'm very glad I haven't. Yeah. But I am aware of the type of shows and growing popularity of them. I think they set a dangerous precedent, as in poking the unseen bear. And for the sake of viewership, mess with the forces, in my opinion. There shouldn't be. To say nothing of the future mental health of the presenters exposed to this on a long-term career basis. Briefly, what are your thoughts on that?
Right. What's really interesting about this sort of stuff on TV is I'm not sure that it's particularly damaging, not to the presenters, but what it does is it sort of it puts things in people's minds, actually. So Most Haunted was one of the really interesting ones that was sort of, it was one of the first ones where they'd basically take you to, the most haunted pub in Derbyshire or whatever it is. And, they'd stick the presenters in the, in the basement. They turn all the lights off and they'd listen to them scream or whatever. And, I have wondered whether that was just a sort of the tantrum builds up and something blows, but that's my that's my theory there. And but it something may actually be rigged or staged or whatever to know. But what was quite interesting about that was that they used to talk about these orbs on the on the camera lens. And so we used to get lots of people coming and saying, well, we've taken a photo of it, and there were orbs. And of course, the orbs were actually the way that the dust caught the light. So we get all of those. There's a whole load of interest at the moment in cursed objects, apparently. So, and that's being sort of fueled by films and TV programs. So, cursed dolls, cursed music boxes. And dolls and music boxes are actually creepy in their own right. So dolls, that sort of faintly human thing, and that's a lots of Hollywood films have got sort of cursed dolls or whatever. Music boxes, the way that they, the sound deteriorates as they're winding down, and then you get that sort of silence and bang, the sort of, I think it's sort of almost, sort of form of suggestion. But people are beginning to come with, to report, this is cursed or that's cursed. Somebody was talking to me the other day about a cursed toaster. I thought, well, actually, to be honest, all toasters are cursed. The number of times they irrationally toast is, so each toaster obviously has its own demon. So that's a joke. Please.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine. I wouldn't have thought you would have rolled your eyes, but thought, yeah. Here we go. The cursed toaster. Yeah.
But the question is, why would a spirit, sort of either a demon or the spirit of somebody who died, want to inhabit a toaster? Anyway,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean,
or a music box, or a doll.
Yeah, oh, exactly. There could be 101 things, probably more to get the attention of the living through that spirit than just a mundane object such as that. So could we, if you don't mind, just define poltergeist, ghosts, hauntings, demons, are they one of the same or different? If you could just define those before we move on for me, please.
Right. Yeah, all different. So poltergeist activity, as opposed to poltergeist, we talk about poltergeist activity is something that is caused by somebody alive and present at the time. So it's when stuff moves around, stuff goes missing actually as well. And it seems to be basically somebody's energy. So very often associated with sort of teenagers or whatever. Teenagers are notoriously bad at, sort of, talking about sort of stuff that's going on in their lives. And, it's almost as if they're sort of, whatever angst they're feeling gets moved into the physical world, which is, absolutely completely weird. We call it psychokinetic energy, which is a scientific word, well, pseudo-scientific word for something that is utterly weird. But these things seem to be moved around by an energy. And it's not an evil energy, it is just energy. Sometimes it's caused by people who are sort of going through other trauma in their lives. Severe pain is one of the ones that will cause these sorts of things to happen. Other things might be, sort of beginning of Alzheimer's or whatever. So nursing homes, residential homes, that sort of thing. These things very often happen in those. So you get sort of people knocking on doors and there's nobody there. That's a sort of relatively common phenomenon. And, you also get it with, as I said, sort of teenagers in particular, so just not being able to express what they're going through. One of the things that's also quite interesting is that people are occasionally, for want of a better word, psychic sensitive, whatever you want to call it, to stuff that's going on around them. And those sorts of activities might be more associated with them as well. So if you've got somebody who's got a, sort of history of seeing things in the family, and that, there might be a history in the family, poltergeist activity is one of the things that might happen. So that's basically pure poltergeist activity, and it's one of those common things that we deal with. And then there are, what we call place memories and true hauntings. So place memories it's basically a ghost, for want of a better word, that is sort of somehow recorded by the building. So it's not there. It's like the sort of fox hunt that comes through the pub wall. Occasionally you get sort of reported in lots of different places. Fox hunt isn't there. The fox isn't real. It's something that used to happen in that place, and somehow it's been recorded in the building, and building's been built on this, particular place. The Roman soldiers walking through the house in York on the sort of Minster Green at sort of waist height. That's another classic one that lots of people have seen. They're not there. They're not trying to communicate. They're not causing any damage or disturbance. And they're just there. As I said, it's a sort of place memory. They can be disturbed or triggered by stuff happening in buildings. So if buildings are being renovated or restored, apart or demolished, that might actually trigger some of that activity. It's difficult to know exactly what's triggering it. Sometimes people pick up on it, and it can be actually living with a place memory thing isn't a particularly pleasant thing to do, because you've got a guy once fell down the stairs and broke his neck, and he's still lying there and the family step over him. But actually living with that can trigger poltergeist activity as well, because you're sort of you're sort of worried about it, and the stuff around you is moving. And then there are true hauntings. True hauntings tend to be examples of somebody who's trying to communicate with you in some way, form. Very often it'll be somebody you've known in life. So a friend of mine, Pete, used to, his his axe used to appear around the house, and that seemed to be a sort of protection thing. He wasn't bothered; everybody else was bothered, and particularly when the axe used to appear in the bedroom at the bottom of the bed and sort of terrify the wits out of house guests, and would also appear in the shower as well, which was particularly unfortunate. Pete wasn't bothered. Other people were much more bothered by that, but they all managed to identify this guy from his pictures in the around the house. So that's a sort of true haunting, and Pete was quite happy with the idea that this guy was around up to a point, because he felt that actually he shouldn't really be here. But he said, well, he's my friend, doesn't bother me, doesn't frighten me, which was quite interesting actually. And those are sort of, in a sense, that's almost a sort of unfinished business type thing. There was something going on between those two that was unfinished business, and it felt like a sort of form of protection. At that point, and people do occasionally see somebody that's died. Sometimes this only happens once, and again, difficult to know whether it's it's a sort of final comfort, everything's all right, I'm safe visit, or whether it's you walk into the living room, and Bert always used to sit in the armchair. You walk into the living room, and your brain reconstructs the world as it used to be, with Bert still sitting in the armchair. So again, not an uncommon thing to happen. Lots of people experience a sort of a dead loved one who will come back once, and it's if they come back repeatedly that we tend to get called in, because that's a bit more of a problem. Demons are something completely different. So demons seem to be a sort of spirit or something, not the spirit of somebody who's died, and some sort of sort of spiritual energy which will possess somebody. Lots of people get in touch with me to say, I'm possessed. Can you do something about it? And in a sense, it's that's really difficult, because trying to explain to somebody that if you were properly possessed by an evil entity, the evil entity wouldn't let you get in touch with somebody like me to get rid of it, is one of those things that sort of takes quite a lot of sensitivity. But lots of people come to me and say that they're possessed. So we're looking for three things, basically, the signs or symptoms of possession. One of them is preternatural strength, and I mean, just sort of throwing a sort of solid oak dining room table at you, that would do it. The other ones are knowing stuff about you that they really shouldn't know. So if you walk into the room and somebody says, "Yeah, I saw your internet browser history, and you've got a gambling addiction or whatever, or I saw you're having an affair with whoever," and stuff that can actually throw you off kilter. That one, that could also be a sign of demonic. And the third one is knowledge of languages that you've never studied. So if somebody starts speaking to you in colloquial Arabic, and there was an instance of a little old lady who lived in Cornwall all her life, and there was sort of all sorts of weird stuff going on around her, and one of them was that she was speaking colloquial Arabic from sort of village in the Aswan area of Egypt. Well, actually, that was that was enough to sort of suggest that she was actually properly possessed. But those things are really, really rare. So actually, we don't do very many exorcisms. I've never done one. Very, very few of my colleagues have ever done. And the chances are that if you were going to do them, they would be in a psychiatric hospital, because those are fairly extreme things to happen. So if those things are happening around somebody, the chances are that they would probably end up being sectioned. And then, if they didn't respond to medication, maybe you might get called in and might be invited to do an exorcism. But obviously, performing an exorcism on somebody who isn't actually possessed there's no point in doing it. Could be dangerous because actually you're setting yourself and them up for failure. If they're not actually possessed, well, there's no point in doing it. It's like sort of somebody coming to you with a broken arm and you sort of sticking a plaster on it. It won't work.
We will be right back after this message.
Hi, I'm Jazz from ScaryDolly.com. We all want to feel safe, right? And know our home and loved ones are protected around the clock. Here at ScaryDolly.com, we can provide 100% certified demonically possessed dolls to protect your family, home, and property while you sleep soundly. Visit us at ScaryDolly.com to see our in-store range and options. Each of our dollies comes with a verifiable certificate of demonic possession, as well as easy-to-follow step-by-step instructions for protecting yourself also. Use the promo code SlickPodcast21 to get an amazing 7% off our new scary-ass China dolls. Or try our classic Victorian 360 head-turner range. From clowns to rag dolls, whatever your home security needs, it's got to be ScaryDolly.com.
Yeah, that's a good analogy, because then you're obviously disabling the arm for those 6 weeks and introducing atrophy into the muscle. So you are doing more harm. So let's talk about a case that you've been called to with a haunting or a poltergeist or something like that you believe warranted that. And what action, tell us about the case and then tell us what you can as far as action that you took against that.
Okay, so really lovely case. My friend Lucy, and she lived with her husband and kids in a Edwardian semi-detached house, and she lived in it for a while, and there were just sort of slightly odd things going on in the house. So one of the things was that they could hear organ music. And they seen it was coming from next door. There was somebody who was obviously a very talented organist, sort of Yamaha organ music, rather than sort of Phantom of the Opera type thing. So they could hear organ music. They could occasionally hear people walking up and down the stairs, and they thought, well, actually, it's next door. It's quite clearly nobody on the stairs. That's next door. And her son was one of these meticulous teenagers who'd always got his shoes together, and he was sort of, his bedroom was absolutely perfect and spotless. He knew where all of his stuff was, and his stuff used to go missing. He used to end up on top of the airing cupboard, top of the fridge, actually. Strangely enough, stuff ending up on top of the fridge is another sort of, one of those weird things that very often happens. Shoes going missing, stuff ending up on top of fridges, quite common in these regards. Don't ask me why, because I've got no idea. So and this stuff was going on, and then Lucy knew that I'd been because we've sort of been been friends for a long time, and and what was really what triggered her to sort of call me in was that she was sitting in her living room. The sort of passage door was open so she could see the stairs, and she said that I could see somebody coming down the stairs. And she said, I know it sounds really corny, but it was it looked like a little old lady, because she was wearing a 90. And she said, but the thing was that she said, well, it wasn't like a sort of, ghostly 90. It was sort of, sort of pink Winceyette 90 with sort of, I think she might have described flowers on it as well. And I said, you sure you didn't imagine it? She said, I would not have imagined somebody coming down the stairs in, sort of bedroom slippers and a pink Winceyette 90. Okay, fine. So I went round and I blessed the house for her. And so the normal way that you would bless a house is we, a bit like my vicar all those years previously, we'd bless holy water and we'd go around the house and we'd basically bless the house with holy water, and then we'd return to the main room of the house. But in this, because she'd seen something, and the detail that I forgot to say was that the organ music, she'd been speaking to her next door neighbour when her next door neighbour moved out, and she said, well, I will miss the organ music. They said, well, nobody plays the organ. Strange enough, the little old lady who used to live in your house was a theatre organist when there was one down in the cinema in town. So it's quite interesting. So it looked like the old lady was still around somehow, because she'd seen something, and there was a whole load of sort of additional phenomena. We celebrated a Requiem Mass, a Requiem Eucharist, communion service, whatever you want to call it. So that's Central Active Christian Worship. We do it every Sunday. We take bread, we take wine, and we say the words that Jesus said, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And the traditional Christian theology is that, that's basically the presence of Jesus arriving in a particular place. And what was quite interesting about this was that we did it, that we celebrated the Eucharist, but just before we were going to do that, Lucy's parents turned up. So the people I know, and so they were sitting there, and afterwards they reported back to me that Father had seen a sort of mist gathering while I was celebrating the Eucharist, while I was saying the Eucharistic prayer, and that it had disappeared at a certain point. And I sort of said, okay, well, what was the point it disappeared? He said, well, when you picked up the bread. I said, well, what was I saying? He said, oh, it was a bit about, this is my body bit, and which was where traditional Christian theology would say, actually, that's when the presence of Jesus becomes sort of physically present, or present in it through the bread. And that was the point when whatever mist he saw disappeared. And he's got a history of sort of seeing stuff around the place. So that was really, interesting. And the house was fine after that. The shoes stopped going missing. Nobody came down the stairs, in a nightie or otherwise. And the organ music also stopped.
There is a good collection of your experiences from your Deliverance ministries. But there is also a point that you make that, let's say if it was myself ringing you and you would be able to tell in my voice, because I would be really concerned, probably terrified. And there are other people that seem to be almost nonchalant, as in, oh, I think I've got a ghost. There is a reason why, or at least by one of the questions I had for you was about not being happy where I lived. Can you just connect those dots for my listeners?
Okay. Yeah, this was doesn't happen quite so much anymore. The first time I was actually called out to do a case on my own was by a housing officer, and so it just got this sort of, somebody'd seen a ghost or whatever, shadows, blah 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 blah, and it was, it's all terribly, nonchalant, as you say, sort of over there. Yeah, okay, yeah, so blah, blah, blah. And the housing officer was bored out of his skull as well. Nobody was bothered, nobody was frightened, nobody was anxious. They were just sort of going through the motions. And so I thought, this is really strange, because this was my first solo case and I was expecting it to be really exciting, and I was expecting it to be sort of, feel as if I'd really achieved something, here I was, super priest. I don't feel like that anymore, but it's your first time out, and it's just really boring. So I sort of spoke to a friend afterwards, and he laughed, and he said, "Oh," he said, "that one, yeah." He said, "Yeah, I get those all the time." Basically, if you can hook the priest out to, to sort of blessing your house, so obviously you might have a ghost, and they might actually find you a different council house. I don't think it happens very much anymore. It's a long time since I've been called in, but that was sort of one of those things that was sort of doing the rounds at the time. If you're living in a haunted council house, the council might actually find you something different and maybe better if you were lucky.
But you do get people who are genuinely terrified of what is seemingly going on in their home. And,
in a sense, so I'd normally have a phone conversation with them. A lot of the time people would contact me by email. And we've got a new system introduced in the last couple of months where they need to be logged by the bishop's secretary. So they would also have a conversation with her, and then she'd pass it on to me. So got this sort of slightly weird system just at the moment where people contact me and I send them to her, and then she sends them back to me. But there you go. That's, it means that they are logged in the system for sort of insurance purposes as much as anything else, so that so the bishop at least knows roughly what we're doing, just in case anyone ever there's some going back. It makes sense anyway. So but I'd normally try to have a phone conversation with them, and one of the things that people very often say is that this is going to sound really weird, and my response is, actually, strangely enough, I do weird, so just tell me. And so they, but very often they would be sort of anxious, frightened, just sort of nervous of, they really don't, it's not something they want to talk about because it's something that, is affecting them personally. When you go to see them, there is always that sort of sense of anxiety, and what we offer them, what I've tried to offer them to some extent by writing the book, by also doing podcasts like this, is a huge amount of reassurance that these things happen to normal people. They happen to normal people like me. I've had these experiences myself, and it's not something that's, it's worrying, it's frightening, but it's not something that can't be dealt with. And so if that message goes out there in whatever shape or form, I'd be immensely grateful.
Here's a curveball for you. Having now spent years as a deliverance minister and seen many things of the supernatural, has this strengthened your faith in a way that you may not have gotten if you hadn't sidelined in deliverance ministry? And I did not mean that in a derogatory way. Or has this interaction with the supernatural brought nothing but another part of the job to do?
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. I haven't been asked that before. Does it strengthen my faith? Yeah. It is a phenomenon where some clergy basically lose their faith, or lose their sense of vocation. Fortunately, that's never happened to me. But yeah, it probably has confirmed my faith in all sorts of ways, because and I'm much more open to a lot of things that I might have been closed to before. So I've seen and experienced weird stuff happening around me. One of the things would be that, temperature in, sort of some instances just, shooting up to where it should be, sort of a bit like the house we were living in, but that didn't seem to be quite as instant. So I've experienced that a couple of times. And in a sense, what I, it's almost like sort of experiencing the power of God that I think is really, sort of really helps confirm my faith. This is, part of, it's also part of my ministry that I just do, and there are other things that sort of confirm my faith. So when I celebrate the Eucharist on a Sunday morning, that's actually quite a powerful experience of God for me. And yeah, but I think it probably has strengthened my faith and more appreciative of the way that God actually works. Yeah.
Maybe to my listeners, it maybe seemed a little bit disrespectful me saying that.
No,
I am
not at all.
having read your book and having searched your background, but also having spoke to Father Nathan Castle, I am aware as much as somebody can be of the other, mundane is not the word, other duties you perform. Some are very testing to the soul, such and to the emotions, such as laying someone to rest, being there for the family while maybe falling to pieces yourself because you knew that person. So it wasn't, that is your faith enough. But I thought I'd ask that because you're seeing the supernatural, obviously, in all its glory. And I just thought, I need to ask Jason this.
No, and thanks for asking me, because in a sense that it's some of those things that sort of grind you down. So in the autumn this year, we had, as I said, this was a really big church. I'm sitting in the church at the moment, looking down on it from the upstairs office, and we get really big funerals, traumatic funerals, and over the autumn we just had one after another. Just the way it worked out, and that was exhausting. The sort of, sort of having something that you can, having a faith that you can hold on, and to some extent, I suppose, having experiences you sort of, that you can hold on to makes that bearable. Of somebody who's, really should not have died, or somebody you've known, sort of very well, and they shouldn't have died either. That can be very,
because our clergy, our medical professionals, our undertakers, our teachers, our policemen must always seem, or they do seem, infallible, but it's actually quite the opposite. And I don't mean to bring the tone down here, but you are human. Everybody's human. But I've always thought that, it's not really getting off the subject, but because faith and belief to me are completely different. Somebody can believe something, but faith is completely different. I mean, for myself, it's a bit melodramatic, but for myself, when I come across things in life that seem like a dark chasm, I cast my faith before me. I tread carefully and I pray that it holds whatever denomination people think that may be. It doesn't matter, but that is, at the end of the day, is all I have, and thus far it has held true. What would you say about that?
Really interesting, actually. One of the things that people with a strong faith going into a really traumatic experience from sort of years, as I said, I've been doing this 25 odd years. They are more likely to say something along the lines of, actually, it's my faith that got me through this experience. An experience of bereavement, if somebody dies very suddenly. And it's so somebody with a very strong faith going into that will be, will sort of come out sort of thinking, actually, it's, my faith has got me through this. What very often they will say, and I've heard this so many times, is that I don't know how people cope if they don't believe. And then, but I also deal with a lot of people, obviously, who are, in a sense, have a sort of nominal Christian belief. They're sort of, in a sense, of cultural Christians, and they're the people who will actually rail at God or rail at me sometimes. Why is God doing this to me? And that's quite interesting, because actually, the sort of, the people who have a very strong active faith sort of rely on God. The people who have, that sort of vestigial faith, just sort of, well, actually, why is God doing this to me? It's just quite an interesting thing.
Yes, we've been tested, myself and my wife. Not tested, no. We've seen some experiences this last 2 years with tragedy. For myself and my wife,
I'm sorry.
sorry, carry on, Jason.
No. carry on.
Oh, okay. We're just life, basically, just life. And it is faith, not being holier than thou, but accepting that this is the bigger picture, which I know has carried us forward. So moving on, before I've depressed yourself and all my listeners, I do apologise. In my opinion, there are definitely demonic entities, maybe dramatic, that walk the earth and claim a victim as their own, to do their bidding or destroy the host. Have you experienced a case of demonic possession that you have had to deal with personally, or know of one that you believe to be a legitimate case where an entity has had to been cast out?
Right. Personally, I've never experienced it myself because those things seem to be exceedingly rare. Occasionally, I've encountered people who are, who have made my skin crawl. And have felt evil. There've been a sort of I think of people during the course of my life who just sort of and there was something about them that made me feel very deeply uncomfortable being with them, and I wanted to get away as soon as I possibly could. Whether they were actually possessed, I don't know. They weren't showing any of those symptoms, and I wasn't in a position, to do any of those things either. But they each one of those people had in some ways destroyed other people. So I don't know whether that's whether they might have been properly possessed, and if they'd been confronted, they might have, in a sense, sort of started to display those symptoms. So that's actually really difficult because I wasn't, these were just sort of, in a sense, chance conversations that I've had with people. And you think, actually, yeah. So I definitely believe in the power of evil. Whether those people were, as I said, actually possessed, or whether they'd somehow given themselves over to evil, I don't know. A lot of the time, we don't actually know what's going on. We just know the effects of inviting God to deal with those things.
I suppose that Hollywood as well has done no favours. Possession, nah. I'm guessing, is really no exact science, but Hollywood would maybe have people believe that possession has to have somebody with their head turning 360 degrees and doing those demonic miraculous things, where it could be quite somebody, as I would term, as an energy vampire, somebody who has no moral values and is just depravity itself. But you wouldn't necessarily think they're demonically possessed.
Yeah, exactly. So in a sense, it's just sort of knowing, and to some extent, the people who sort of talk to me and say, I'm possessed, I feel immensely sorry for them. And it's sort of, because, they're usually people who are hearing voices. And I'm possessed because I'm hearing voices, and the demon is telling me to do whatever. Or the demon just whispers in my ears all the time. And of course, hearing voices is not a symptom of demonic possession. It's a symptom of psychosis, usually schizophrenia. The chances are that if somebody's presenting with those things, as I said, there is no point in performing an exorcism because it won't. In fact, you're colluding with them by performing an exorcism because it really will not work. We then have sort of conversations about are you on medication? Yeah, well, I've stopped taking it because I'm I'm not psychotic, I'm possessed. Right. And then you sort of actually working with them to try and get them to see, well, actually, if you were properly possessed, the demon wouldn't let you talk to me. Yeah, and I've had this conversation with quite a number of people over the years, and some people accept that and say, "Well, actually, so I'm not possessed." No, you're not. So what do I need to do? You need to, go back to, go back to the medics and say, "Look, I'm really sorry. I thought I was better. I came off my tablets. I need to take them again." And there are people out there, which is, this is the really frustrating thing. You can go online, you can sort of talk to an exorcist online who will, for a small consideration, perform an exorcism over Zoom, and they're basically colluding with people, because I've encountered one who sort of said, well, actually, we knew that this person was was schizophrenic, but we felt that we needed to perform an exorcism anyway. Actually, no, you don't do that. So, but encountering somebody who is just evil is, a sort of completely different thing. And the people that I encountered were much more the people that I might have expected a demon to take hold of. So I don't think the demon is going to take hold of sort of somebody who's, a sort of, extreme case, sort of drugs user on a, homeless drugs user. I don't think there's any particular point in the demon doing that. But the demon can take over somebody who's got a sort of position of influence in whatever way. And, and the people that I'm thinking of all had some sort of influence somewhere along the line, and they all felt, yeah.
I think your points were all valid points, where the almost exorcist online and that sort of thing. That really does get to me, because on a few shows I've mentioned for $20 you can speak to your guardian angels. I think this is as dangerous as it is irritating, because people who are vulnerable, who always suffer, who always end up the victim here, are easily reeled in and become a cash cow. And, rather than being a good person, talking to them like you would do, like I would do for free, then these people are milked of everything. I think that's a very, very dangerous thing.
And sorry, I said irritated. Actually, when I first encountered this, I think incandescently angry was probably the phrase that.
Of course, because you're talking of your training over the years, just as a minister. Then obviously you've gone on to other things, and it's not just marrying people, burying people. There's so much more. It's not just drinking teas. It's talking to people. It's everything in between. Then to have somebody. It's like when people, I've had a couple of people talk to me and say, I'm now a Reiki master. And I don't hide rolling my eyes. I just look at them and say, grow up. The word master, it's not what you think it means. You know where I'm going with this. So people, yes, quite right too. You should be annoyed. And I'm sure you're spreading, you're sugarcoating it, and you have to obviously. But
yes, I am at the end of the day an Anglican priest. Sort of when I say yes, I'm mildly irritated by that. That means I'm absolutely furious. Sorry.
Yes, and quite no, don't apologise. You're absolutely right, because playing with people's lives in that way, where they're so vulnerable, can end in tragedy. Absolutely.
And in a sense, the training stuff started from a case that was, there was no payment involved, but it was somebody who performed an exorcism on a guy who was, sort of quite clearly psychotic. The exorcism was performed, and then he went home and he murdered his wife in a vile and gruesome manner, and was found, sort of covered in her blood, naked in the middle of the road, sort of, and sort of when it came to trial, obviously, he, in his defence, he said, well, I've been, I went to the local vicar, and an exorcism was performed, and it's their fault, really. So that's how the whole sort of, in a sense, this sort of professionalism, the fact that we go on this training, that we go through all these checks and balances. If we come across somebody who we genuinely think is possessed and needs an exorcism, we need to get permission from the bishop, one permission, one time. So there is a single permission, where you would get in touch with the bishop and say, in my opinion, this person needs, really does need to have an exorcism performed. The bishop will give us permission, just, sort of single use permission. And as I said, the chances are that it would be in a psychiatric hospital, but you would need medical support at that point. You asked if I'd come across a sort of genuine case. There's one that sort of is in a lot of the textbooks about a sort of a woman who was possessed by spirits of I think it was lust, hate, and death. And she was in a psychiatric hospital, and the chaplain and the local deliverance minister were called in to try and deal with this, and they performed an exorcism for this for this. When they walked in, she did actually start sort of raking through some of the hospital chaplains' slightly murkier past. Anyway, so this was, they were called in, they performed the exorcism, and she basically sort of returned to normal. And they walked out, and the medics were saying, this is amazing, she was definitely possessed, and you cast out a demon. The priests walked out and said, she was faking it, wasn't she?
Wow, how would it? So they absolutely knew that she absolutely was faking it, and she wasn't.
So in a sense, you never know. But just this, it was, sort of interesting that, this sort of an exorcism was performed in a psychiatric hospital. The doctors were convinced that the exorcism had worked, and the priests were sort of walking out thinking, well, that was sort of,
Talk about a whodunit cliffhanger. So we're really not. In your opinion, then, Jason, what you know of it, would you have taken into account that the doctors are professional and so were the clergy? Who may have been right here? Well, they may have both been right, but what would you think?
Well, really difficult to know because you're not there, and
right.
Obviously, sort of whatever it was worked. But as I said, the priests were saying, well, actually, this was. This was sort of, this was bogus, really. And the medics were saying that this is a spiritual thing. So, the only, occasionally, apparently, in psychiatric settings, that exorcisms are performed. But there was one that that somebody was telling me about, where the exorcism was performed at the request of the medics, knowing that it wasn't going to work. It was somebody who was basically refusing to engage at all and said, well, I'm not schizophrenic or whatever it was, I'm possessed. And so they got in the chaplain, and the chaplain got the permission to do this, knowing that that wasn't going to work, so that they could basically say, well, we did an exorcism, it didn't work. Take your tablets. So that's a sort of, an exorcism that was an example of an exorcism was performed, knowing that it wasn't going to work.
Well, so a last question, really, because I know, obviously, you've got other things to do, Jason. I do appreciate your time today. Do you think today's world is more of a fertile place for such things as possession or, let's say, evil to prevail than 50 years ago? I'm thinking, for one example, of the horrible music videos that seem to portray wickedness, deliberately incarnate through the portrayal of demons, etc., like the opening of the NFL Super Bowl, etc. Just music videos, maybe, but the darkness in tone seems more and more frequent and to me worrying. And things like violent video games, violent films. Yes, I haven't got a television, but they're in your face when grown adults talk about films as almost being fact, and how we'll go home and spend time on the computer, simulating killing.
I suspect that these things have always been around, and that, in a sense, having all those things mean that they are further in the front of people's minds. So, sort of people do come to me and say, I'm possessed. Years ago, we didn't get that to the same extent. And to some extent, sort of, you might say that this is sort of making fun of evil. I suppose people have always used, used evil as a sort of way of selling stuff. Just think about Dracula. The novel Bram Stoker's Dracula. That was, what published in the 1890s, 1880s. I'm not sure of the date, but that was made Bram Stoker a huge amount of money, and and spawned a whole load of sort of vampires in popular culture, I suppose. I don't know whether it's sort of it's something necessarily to worry about.
No, I'm being over dramatic.
Yeah, maybe.
That's probably my problem. Over dramatic. So that's us at the top of the hour, Jason. And again, I've really enjoyed our conversation today. Greatly appreciate the time you've given us. Before we wrap up, I'd ask you to consider giving us a few words of inspiration for the day. Maybe not a prayer, because I know that we're not your parishioners, but maybe a few words of inspiration before we go. And also you can tell my listeners where they can find your book. And if there are any shout outs or mentions you'd like to give, then please feel free.
I think the words of inspiration are that God is always more powerful than evil. Good is always more powerful than evil. And, for me as a Christian, good is sort of found in Jesus and in faith in him. And that is the most powerful thing of all. Jesus conquered death forever, as far as Christians are concerned, and conquered the powers of evil once and for all. We're still claiming that today. So that's, that's what I believe, and that's, in a sense, that's words of inspiration, if you like. In terms of getting hold of the book, it was published by Coronet, which is not a group. It's available, should be available in bookshops, in paperback now, but you can order it, so through your local bookshop. You can order it on Amazon. It's also available as an ebook, and it's also available as an audiobook as well from Hachette Audiobooks, and you can, sort of get that in the way that you would normally get your audiobooks. And that's sadly me reading it. So if you want to actually listen to me reading my own book and telling some of these experiences with fewer hesitations, that's the way to go.
Reverend Jason Bray, thank you.
You're very welcome, Simon. Thank you.
And that was the Reverend Dr. Jason Bray interview. I really enjoyed our conversation here today and definitely appreciated Jason's time also. It seems to me, having talked to Jason, time is something that he rarely has to himself very often. And as always, I greatly appreciate the time you, my dear listeners, have given whilst attending this cast. It's affirming when talking with someone who deals with the extremes of life that there is definitely more to it than most of us experience. On another note, I'm absolutely sure that I wouldn't have the strength this vicar has with dealing with the extremes day in and day out that he has to. Always being strong for those who are weak and falling apart in the worst of times. Always knowing what to say in the right moment. I've been to 2 funerals relatively recently and they completely wiped me out. I gave eulogies at both, as some of you may or may not know. How anyone has the strength to deal with the everyday problems, tragedies and triumphs day after day is beyond me. But kudos to Father Jason and anyone whose vocation is to provide such support in our community. You can find Jason's book Deliverance on Amazon in its Kindle, paper or hardback format, or audio if you prefer. Just click on the link below. You can find the Simon Laurie King podcast on all the usual platforms, as well as Facebook and YouTube. If you enjoyed the episode, give it a like and subscribe also if you be so kind. Leave a comment below or send the show an email, the slkpodcast@gmail.com. But either way, please keep them kind. And so, my friends, it's time for me to go. Until next time, stay safe, be happy, and certainly not afraid. Bye.
Slick Podcast. Keeping it real and always keeping it groovy.